The wagon door creaked open, dust swirling in the pale morning light. A lone figure stepped down, skirts brushing the dry earth. She kept her head low, clutching a single carpetbag to her chest as if it held the last scraps of her life. Elias Harper stood frozen by the hitching post, hat in hand. This wasn't what he'd prayed for, not exactly. The mail-order brides always arrived with chatter, with practiced smiles for the men who'd written letters over months of hope and loneliness. But this woman, she didn't look at him, didn't look at anyone. Her face was pale beneath the brim of her bonnet, eyes darting like a spooked colt. And in that moment, Elias felt something inside him twist. 3 weeks earlier, the ranch had been silent except for the wind cutting through the pines. Elias had always been good with his hands, splitting rails, breaking horses, but never good with words. He'd buried his father alone 6 winters back. His mother had gone east to live with her sister. His brothers had scattered for gold or war. The Harper homestead sat at the edge of the Wyoming plains, a patch of green hemmed in by hills that turned violet at dusk. It was honest land, but empty land. Every evening, Elias would stand on the porch, oil lamp flickering beside him, and stare at the long dirt road that never seemed to bring anyone. The day he wrote that letter, he sat at the table staring at a blank page for what felt like hours. The words didn't come easy. I got a ranch. Not much, but it's mine. If you're willing to work and make a life, I'll be good to you. I don't know what else to promise except I'll try. He sealed it, paid for the advertisement, and prayed like a man prays over a dying horse. Quiet, desperate, half afraid God wasn't listening. Now she was here. Her boots hit the ground softly, but her hands trembled on that carpetbag. The stage driver looked uneasy, glancing at Elias as if to say good luck, friend. You Elias Harper? The driver asked. Elias nodded. This here's Miss Claire Dawson. Paperwork's in the bag. Claire. The name felt too gentle for someone who looked so hunted. She gave a quick, shallow nod, never meeting his eyes. Elias took a step forward, reaching for her bag. She flinched like he'd raised a whip. He pulled back slow, like gentling a skittish mare. I'll, get your trunk. There ain't one, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Elias's chest tightened. No trunk, no belongings, just a single worn bag and fear in her eyes. The road back to the ranch stretched long and empty. Claire sat rigid on the wagon bench, hands clasped so tight her knuckles whitened. Elias tried words, small ones. You from back east? A stiff nod. Train ride treat you rough? Another nod, but no words. Elias let the silence sit after that. The prairie didn't mind quiet, and neither did he. But something about this silence felt wrong. Like she wasn't just shy, but hiding inside herself. The wind carried the scent of sage and pine. Far-off clouds promised rain, but the sun still beat hard on the open land. When they reached the ranch, the old hound barked once and settled back under the porch. Elias helped Claire down, keeping his distance. This here's home, he said, soft. She looked around as if memorizing every fence post, every tree, like a trapped bird mapping escape routes. Inside, the cabin was tidy but spare. 2 chairs, a table, a single bed he'd built himself, rough-hewn but solid. She lingered by the doorway, fingers clutching her skirt. You can rest, Elias offered. I'll fetch water. When he stepped back inside with the bucket, she was sitting at the edge of the bed, carpetbag on her lap. She hadn't opened it. She just stared at her hands. That night, Elias lay awake on a blanket near the fire, the bed left for her. The flames flickered shadows on the log walls. He thought about the letter she must have read, what she'd expected, what she'd run from, and he wondered, not for the first time, if he'd made a mistake. By morning, the world felt different. Claire stood outside, staring toward the horizon where the road vanished. Elias stepped up beside her, coffee steaming in his tin cup. You thinkin' of going back? He asked quietly. Her eyes stayed on the road. There ain't nothin' to go back to. The way she said it, flat, final, made Elias's stomach knot. But before he could speak, hoofbeats echoed from the ridge. A lone rider, kicking up dust, headed straight for the ranch. Elias squinted. It was Thomas Avery, the neighbor who always had more to say than he ought to. Thomas swung down from his horse, eyes cutting toward Claire like she was a new brand on the range. "Heard you finally sent for one," Thomas said, smirking. "Hope she's worth the coin." Elias felt heat rise in his chest. "This is Claire Dawson. She's my guest." "Guest?" Thomas laughed. "Guess we'll see how long guest lasts. Folks'll be talkin', Harper. You don't know where she came from. Ain't no tellin' what she's runnin' from." Claire's fingers tightened around her bag. Elias stepped closer, his voice even. "I said she's my guest." Thomas studied Claire for a long, uncomfortable moment, then spat in the dirt. "Don't say I didn't warn you. Strays always come with trouble." He mounted up and rode off, leaving dust hanging in the air. Claire stood very still, eyes fixed on the ground. Elias wanted to tell her Thomas didn't mean it, but the truth was he probably did. And Elias couldn't shake the feeling that the man wasn't wrong. This woman was running from something. He just didn't know yet if it would catch up to her here. The days that followed felt like walking across a frozen creek. Quiet, careful, every step unsure if the ice would hold. Claire moved through the cabin like a shadow. She cooked simple meals without being asked, swept the floor, washed clothes in the creek, always keeping her eyes down. She never spoke unless Elias spoke first, and even then her answers were short. Elias wasn't a man of many words himself, but the silence pressed on him heavier each day. The nights were the worst. He kept to his blanket by the fire, leaving her the bed. He could hear her shifting restlessly, as if sleep wouldn't come. More than once, he thought he heard muffled sobs, but when he stirred, she always went quiet. One afternoon, Elias saddled up to ride into town for supplies. "You want to come along?" he asked. Claire shook her head. "You sure? Might do you good to see more than just these four walls." Her hands tightened around the handle of the washbasin. "I'll stay." Elias studied her for a moment. She wasn't just shy, she was afraid. When he arrived in town, he could feel the stares. Old Mrs. Whitlow, who ran the general store, whispered to another woman as he passed. The blacksmith gave him a pointed look, then spat in the dirt. Inside the store, Thomas Avery leaned on the counter, waiting. "Harper," Thomas said with a smirk. "How's life with your mystery bride?" Elias ignored him, placing flour, coffee, and beans on the counter. "Funny thing," Thomas went on. "A writer came through 2 days back. Said a girl went missin' from a homestead near Cheyenne. Some fellas lookin' for her. Real determined like." Elias felt his jaw tighten. "You tellin' me this for a reason?" Thomas shrugged, eyes glinting. "Just sayin'. Folks don't disappear without reason. You don't know what you brought to your doorstep." Back at the ranch, Claire sat on the porch, hands folded in her lap. She looked like she'd been waiting for him the whole time. Elias handed her a small bundle sugar, a rare treat. Her eyes flicked to his for the briefest moment. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, as Elias sat cleaning his rifle by lamplight, he finally spoke. "You runnin' from someone?" Claire froze. "I ain't gonna throw you out," he said softly. "But I can't protect you if I don't know what I'm up against." For a long time, she said nothing. Then her voice came low, raw. He told me I was his. Said I didn't need papers. Said no one believed me if I ran. Elias stared at her, the rag going still in his hands. Claire's fingers twisted in her skirt. "I thought if I came far enough, he wouldn't find me." 2 mornings later, the sound of hooves came again. This time 2 riders, kicking up a trail of dust behind them. Elias stepped outside, rifle leaning by the door. Claire stayed just inside the doorway, pale as ash. Thomas Avery was with a deputy from Cheyenne. "You Harper?" the deputy called. Elias nodded once. "We're looking for a woman," the deputy said, eyes sliding toward the door. "Name's Claire Dawson. She's accused of theft. Took off from a man who says she's his wife." Elias felt every muscle in his body tighten. "She ain't his wife," Claire said, voice shaking but firm. He bought me from my uncle. The deputy's jaw twitched. That may be, ma'am, but the law's on his side. Thomas gave Elias a knowing smirk. Told you strays bring trouble. Elias stepped forward slowly, placing himself between Claire and the men. She stays here, he said, voice quiet but steady. The deputy shifted in the saddle. You know that makes you an accessory? I know. Thomas let out a sharp laugh. You're a fool, Harper. Ain't no woman worth this. Elias didn't move. The deputy's eyes hardened. You're making a mistake. Maybe, Elias said, but not one I'll regret. The men turned their horses and rode off, dust trailing behind them. But Elias knew they'd be back. As he turned to go inside, he saw Claire staring at him, eyes wide, tears brimming. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. Yeah, Elias said softly. I did. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she looked at him like she believed him. The wind carried the smell of rain that night, mingled with something heavier, unease. Elias couldn't shake the look in the deputy's eyes when he rode off. He knew what would come next. Men like that didn't let things lie. By dusk the next day, the first signs appeared. Faint dust trails on the horizon, lingering longer than passing riders. Then the sound of distant hoofbeats that never came close, as if scouts were circling. Elias moved through the cabin with a quiet urgency, checking the rifle, counting shells, making sure the old Colt by his belt still fired true. Claire sat at the table, fingers twisted together. They'll come for me, she said, voice hollow. They'll have to come through me first, Elias replied, his tone calm, steady. Her eyes lifted to him, uncertain. Why? You don't even know me. Elias looked at her for a long moment. Maybe I don't need to. By sundown, a single rider approached, this time slow, deliberate, as if daring Elias to act. It wasn't the deputy. It was a tall man in a black coat, face weathered but sharp. His horse looked mean, the kind ridden by men who didn't travel light. Claire stepped onto the porch, the color draining from her face. Elias didn't need to ask. He knew who this was. Claire, the man said smoothly, tipping his hat just enough to mock courtesy. You've had your fun. Time to come home. She ain't going anywhere, Elias said evenly, stepping forward. The man's eyes shifted to Elias, cold and measuring. You got no claim to her. And you do, Elias asked. A smirk tugged at the man's mouth. Paid good coin. Makes her mine. The man dismounted slowly, like a predator circling prey. You're making a poor choice, rancher. Law's on my side. I could drag you into town in chains. You could try, Elias said. The man's gaze hardened. You think you're the first fool to stand in my way? Elias didn't answer. As the tension thickened, more riders appeared, 2, then 3, coming in from the ridge, guns at their hips. Claire's breath hitched. The man in black gave a satisfied smile. Last chance, Harper. Step aside. Elias stepped closer to Claire instead. You want her, Elias said quietly. You'll have to kill me to take her. For a moment, only the wind moved. The riders on the ridge shifted in their saddles, hands twitching near their weapons. Claire's fingers brushed Elias's sleeve, trembling. The man in black tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing. You really want to die for a stranger? Elias didn't flinch. She ain't a stranger anymore. The man's smirk faded, replaced by something darker. Tomorrow morning, he said coldly, we'll settle this. He swung into the saddle, his men following. As they rode off, Elias felt Claire sag slightly against the porch post, her face pale as paper. They're coming back, she whispered. Elias watched the riders disappear into the darkening hills. Yeah, he said softly. They are. And as night fell, the cabin felt smaller, the shadows deeper. Like the walls themselves knew a reckoning was on its way. The night stretched long and silent, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. Elias sat at the table cleaning his rifle for the third time, though it didn't need it. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the flames. You ever shoot one of those? she asked suddenly, her voice small. Elias looked up, surprised to hear her speak more than a few words. Yeah. You ever kill anyone? Elias hesitated. Once. War don't ask permission. Claire nodded slightly, as though she already knew the answer. For a long while they said nothing. Then Claire stood and stepped closer to the table. She set her carpetbag down gently, fingers lingering on the worn handle. You've been wonderin' what I'm carryin', she said softly. Elias didn't deny it. She unlatched the bag and opened it. Inside was a small, tattered dress, folded neatly. A pair of worn shoes, far too small for an adult. And at the very bottom, a tiny wooden horse carved from pine. Elias stared. My boy, she whispered. Her voice trembled. He'd be 5 now. His name was Jonah. Elias swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling over the room. The man who came here, he took me after Jonah's father died. Said I owed him for debts that weren't even mine. When I tried to leave, he said I could go. But Jonah couldn't. He kept my boy. Her hands shook as she touched the wooden horse. I left that night. Thought if I ran far enough, maybe I could earn enough to come back for him. But he won't let me. Elias felt something deep inside him harden. Not anger exactly, but the heavy resolve of a man who'd seen too much wrong go unchallenged. He pushed the rifle aside and reached into the small drawer under the table. From it, he pulled a tintype photograph, faded and worn. A younger Elias stood beside 2 boys and a woman with warm eyes. His mother, his brothers. They're gone now, Elias said quietly. War took my brothers. Sickness took my ma. Ain't a day I don't wonder what life might have been like if someone had stepped in. Just once. He set the photograph on the table, beside her wooden horse. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Claire looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since stepping off that wagon. You could still let me go, she said. I could, Elias replied. And you'd live. Maybe. Claire's lip trembled. Then why? Elias met her gaze steadily. 'Cause if I don't stand for something now, I ain't much of a man worth livin' anyway. A tear slid down Claire's cheek. She wiped it quickly, almost ashamed. Then, slowly, she reached out and rested her hand over the tintype. Thank you, she whispered. It wasn't just gratitude, it was trust. The kind given once and only once in a lifetime. The fire burned low. Outside, the night air felt heavy, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Elias rose, checked the rifle one last time, and stepped out onto the porch. Claire followed, standing quietly beside him. The stars stretched endless above them. In the far distance, faint lanterns glowed, 3 of them, moving slowly along the ridge. They're watching us, Elias murmured. Claire's fingers brushed his sleeve again, firmer this time. They think you're alone, she said softly. Elias looked at her. You're not, she added. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Elias believed her. Dawn broke slow and gray, the prairie still damp from a night of light rain. The horizon glowed faintly as the sun tried to burn through the mist. Elias stood on the porch, rifle in hand, his hat brim low. Claire stood just inside the